So we've got a clip here from about 3 years ago from Kyle, Full Grown Gaming, who had some pretty funny stuff going on in the boat ride minigame here in the swamp.
He should be getting back from his exam pretty soon, I think. What? 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 What is that? Hello?
So that looks a bit like SRM, so I decided to revisit it and try to figure out what's going on. So the first important piece of information to understand what's going on here is that when you shoot the targets in this minigame, the arrow will attach itself to the target, and the hitbox is pretty big, by the way. It will attach itself to the target and then move it as it continues along. And it keeps moving with the arrow until it goes pretty far back. Now you can see this in memory because there's a variable in the arrow that will show what actor it's attached to, similar to the boomerang. Now you see these 4 bytes. When it attaches itself to the target, it will update to the address of the target in memory on the actor heap. So this will be important later. So next up, we need to understand how arrows update. So there's 2 variables in Link's instance that are important for this. This first one here, you'll see that when I shoot a new arrow, it will count from 4 to 0. And it's anytime you shoot a new arrow. Now during this time, when this value counts from 4 to 0, that value being above 0 is what allows the update function for the arrow to run. And when that update function is running, it allows it to continue moving. Now after those 4 frames, when it counts to 0, the arrow has to continue updating, and it instead relies on this value here, which seems to be related to Link's animation and his cutscene state. You'll see that when I slash the owl here, it will become 7. And then 6, and then 0. The arrows can only update and continue on their path when this value is 0. So if you're in a cutscene, they freeze. Now when you shoot the web here with a burning arrow, the cutscene is going to play, and that value is going to go from 0 to 7. And then 6, and then 0. So it clears properly after the web is done burning. Now when you shoot the web on the boat ride itself, you'll see that that value I was just talking about goes from 7 to 6 and does not clear properly. So now I'm technically still in a cutscene state while I'm still able to shoot arrows. So to recap, we know that arrows can update the first 4 frames when Link shoots one, and after that point, this value has to be 0 in order for them to continue updating. What this means is, when you shoot an arrow, it can update for 4 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it switches to looking at this value to see if it can update. And because we shot the web on the boat, this value does not 0 properly, and the arrow will freeze after 4 frames. And it stays there. The non-intuitive part is that when you shoot a new arrow, this value from earlier that I showed will count from 4 again. So I will shoot a new arrow. It will go to 4 and start counting down again. Now, all the other arrows that are out and frozen right now can update when this value is non-zero. So any other arrow that you shot and froze in the air can continue to update. You see both of them are hitting the wall now. So to show that happening, I'm going to put a breakpoint on the function responsible for updating the arrow. And you'll see that when I shoot a new arrow, it will run a few times, break, and then it stops. The arrow is frozen, it's not updating. And then I'll shoot a new one, it breaks again, and updates every existing arrow. So they both move. So a funny side effect of this freezing thing, you see that when you shoot an arrow against a wall, it'll do like a little wiggle animation. When you're in this frozen cutscene state, you can see them update 4 frames of the wiggle animation at a time as they stick to the wall. You'll see that I'll shoot a few, then the previous one moves, previous one moves, previous one moves, and they just keep wiggling a little bit at a time as it advances through that animation. And now this of course applies to the arrow moving through the air too. So you'll see that I'll shoot an arrow, it'll update, and then freeze, and then I'll shoot a new arrow, and now both the new arrow and the old arrow can update for 4 frames. They're both moving. And then I'll shoot another one, and all 3 of these arrows will move and continue on their path. Now to get on to the main point, we learned earlier that shooting the target will attach the arrow to the target, and it will update its position. So things get interesting when you can both freeze the state of the arrow and change rooms on top of it. So we're going through a room change here, through the tunnel. I'm going to shoot the target. And now, that arrow is frozen in the air because it updated for 4 frames, and has a pointer to the target that it just shot, and it's frozen. Now I'm going to advance through the room. And that arrow is still frozen right there, and still thinks it's attached to some actor. But going through the room change now loaded some other actors. And depending on how the heap is set up, there can be an actor attached to it now in this new room, where the target was before. And in Kyle's case, this was the door to the entrance over here. So at this point, you've shot the target, the arrow is frozen, it has a pointer to the target, and you've changed rooms. If the heap is lined up correctly, a new actor will be in the exact same place in memory as the target was, and when you shoot a new arrow and it allows all of the existing arrows to update, it will update with the new actor that's attached to it. So what's happening specifically with shooting the door is a bunch of arrows are being shot and a bunch of targets are being spawned. And you'll see here when I open up Spectrum, you'll see that there's a bunch of F actors. These are all the arrows that are currently out and frozen. And this allows for heap manipulation because you can fill up the heap with some frozen arrows and then spawn a new target toward the beginning of the heap where doors usually go in the heap. So you shoot a target, the room changes, and then the door spawns in the same location that the target was that was previously shot. So in the case of Kyle here, he's shooting a bunch of arrows, shooting some targets, spawning some new ones. You'll see them floating around here. And then I'll change rooms, and the door will spawn in exactly the same location in memory where the previous target just was. And you'll see that the door is going to be attached to the previous arrow that he just shot, not the new one. It comes from behind him and ends up right there. And now, when the arrow hits a wall, the attached actor will go away, but the path that it's taking, it's going to keep going until the arrow hits the ladder. It's going to shoot another one. It's going to go and move forward, and then last one, hit the ladder and stops, and that's where it freezes.
What is that?
So yeah, there's lots of weird stuff going on here. I've got a cool save state where the target is going to get replaced by a new arrow. So you'll see that I have an arrow frozen midair that shot the target, and when I shoot a new one, you're going to see the existing arrow is going to take like a zigzag path as it tries to attach itself to my new arrow. So it takes a zigzag path, tries to attach itself to this, and then when this arrow hits the wall, this one continues on its own path when I shoot another one. So yeah, some pretty interesting stuff. So yeah, this is technically SRM. I personally don't think that this specific type is going to be very useful. We'll see what happens. It seems to rely pretty heavily on being in this cutscene state, but still able to move and shoot. So we'll see what happens. Jimmy mentioned the same thing happens in the cart minigame where you shoot the Gorman brothers, and you can see the arrows also freeze and then update as you shoot new ones. So it's the exact same thing going on over there. But yeah, I guess that's everything.